Sure. About Hashem li be'ozrai, it's famous that I told you this once, that Rosh Yeshiva came to Reb Usher Freund, and Reb Usher asked him, so how is this going? How's the yeshiva going? How's this going? How's that going? And the Rosh Yeshiva says about everything, Hashem was there, Hashem was there, Hashem helps me. So Reb Usher, at the end, after he grilled him, so the Rosh Yeshiva felt compelled to ask Reb Usher, and how are things by you? So Reb Usher said, by me Hashem doesn't help. How can a Jew say something like that? Hashem doesn't help you? He says, no, by me Hashem does everything. He doesn't help. So even just the statement, Hashem li be'ozrai, even if it would just be Hashem helps me, that would even be a problem. To say He's among those who help me
is a bigger problem.
Is a bigger question. Hinei lashon hapasuk ein lo havana. We can't understand this pasuk, this verse. Lichora, seemingly there's no understanding. Demashma sheyesh ozrim acharim, because it sounds as if there are other people who help you other than Hashem. V'akadosh Baruch Hu gam ken imahem, and it's just that Hakadosh Baruch Hu is included. Uve'emet hu ha'ozer Baruch Hu, and really He's the only one who helps. There's nobody else except for Him.
Ourselves?
So we heard from Reb Usher, He does everything.
But we have to keep Torah mitzvahs so they don't help us. So we need to help Him help us.
In any case, even using your lenient reading, so how can it be other helpers? Who are these other helpers? So obviously that's not what it means. Le'avin zeh, to understand this, v'gam le'avin ma'amar hazal, there's a famous maimer of Chazal, I think it's in Nedarim, haba letaher mesay'in lo, and this is sometimes read, including by present company, me, incorrectly, because it doesn't make sense in Hebrew. So I have a tendency to fix it as I'm reading. So I don't read haba letaher mesay'in lo. I don't read he who comes to purify himself. Okay. He's helped. Obviously, the connection here is that he's helped. Okay. Who's helping him? But the question here is haba letaher. I don't read it that way. I read it haba litaher. Because what's the difference between letaher and litaher? So he writes, first of all, ma'u mesay'in lo lashon rabim. Again, why there are many helpers. It's only Hashem that helps. It's an active verb. To purify means that He's coming to purify somebody else.
Yeah, it goes out in the same.
Okay. So He's helped. But when you read this, especially a native speaker will say, Haba litaher, because we understand that He's coming to say, purifying Himself. So who is He purifying? How can you say that He's coming to purify something outside of Himself? Because the meaning seems to be, and also out of the context of the Gemara there, the Talmud there, it seems that what it's saying is that a person is coming to do tshuva. So of course He's purifying Himself. He's not coming to purify somebody else. That's not the topic. It's not that He can't, but that's not what it's talking about there. It should have said, therefore, that He comes to purify Himself. So to understand all this, we go back to our favorite topic. Really, this is all going to be explained using the question of what part of God's presence are we seeing now? Because there's two aspects to God's presence. There's what we call the Sovev Kol Amin, the light that surrounds all worlds, and the light that fills all worlds. And now He gives us the usual explanation. That's the life force within everything. And takes them from nothing into something. It's not their being, it's not their actual existence, but it's what allows them to feel, as we saw last week, separate. And it allows them to feel, to be alive even though they're separate. So that's called coming from nothing to something. Because nothing would be a feeling that I am just one with everything. Nothingness, in the context of Chassidus, especially in the Alter Rebbe here, means that I feel completely at one with everything. That's what it means to feel nothingness, to feel the Ein. That's bittul. But to be yesh me'ain, to be something out of nothing, to be something that has a sense of being separate, that is what memale gives. And memale, in that sense, that's malchus. We've talked about that many times. That's the sphere of kingdom. That's what it means. It gives you a sense of being separate. ואף על פי כן אינו נתפס ומתלבש ממש בתוכם כדמיון הנשמה שמתלבש בתוך הגוף להחיותו, אשר הנשמה מתפעלת ממקרה הגוף, מאין שאין כן אצלו יתברך כתיב אם צדקת מה תיתן לו ואני הווי לא שניתי, וכתיב כי אתה הוא קודם שנברא העולם אתה הוא לאחר, and so on. Like we said, that the memale is not like the soul itself, even though they're similar, they have the same name. The soul fills the body, and the memale, the light of Hashem that fills or gives life force, seems to be doing the same thing. It seems to be described as on the inside, just like the soul is on the inside. But it's not exactly the same thing. He says because the main difference is that there's no tfisa. It's not, like you would say, it's not, what is it, when you use heat to solder something, it's not welded into the body. The memale, the light of Hashem is not like the soul. The soul is like welded into the body. It can't move. But the light of Hashem that's in the person, that's causing him to feel separate, a separate creature, a separate being, it's not welded into him. Eno nitpas, mitlabesh mamash. And it also is not affected by what the body does. It's not affected in the sense that it's not blemished even. And there's a whole question, this would be an interesting way to explain it, but we mentioned this a few times, that the Gra writes that when a person does an Avera, the Neshama leaves. It's not present there.
Chabad doesn't hold like that.
Right. But the Alter Rebbe says no. So a simple way to explain that they're both right is to say that the Alter Rebbe means the Neshama.
Mm-hmm.
And the Gra has a different terminology, but what he really means is the light of the Memale. Because the light of the light of God that fills reality, or fills even the psyche, it's not there when a person does an Avera. That the Alter Rebbe agrees. But it's not the neshama. It's not the same thing. Maybe for the Gra, it's close enough to be called the neshama. Because again, it does create something in the person himself. It creates the feeling of being a separate entity, of being a separate person. Okay. אלא שהוא בחינת סובב כל המין. דהיינו שהוא קדוש. דהיינו שהוא קדוש ומובדל מגדר המין, והחיות המתפשט בתוך עולמו מבחינת מלכותו יתברך לבד. Really, Hashem himself, when you talk about divinity, so divinity is not affected by the world, because really in its essence divinity is what we call the light that surrounds all worlds. And the light that surrounds all worlds, its malchus is what we call memale. So he gives us the relationship again between the light that surrounds all worlds and light that fills all worlds. Or another way, the transcendent and the immanent aspects of Hashem. But even the immanent aspect, he says, is because it's the kingdom of the transcendent aspect, it's not affected by reality. It's not blemished. It knows what's going on, but it's not affected by it.
Well, the reality is Hashem.
Reality is what he created. That he, in his wisdom, decided to create something. It's a paradox, obviously it's a paradox. Everything, you can't understand any of this without accepting the existence of a basic paradox at the very core of reality. שבשביל שמלך שמו נקרא עליהם, כן, מלך שמו נקרא עליהם, ויותר מכל יצור נברא, מלך שמו נקרא עליהם, because he wanted to be king, so that's where the memale comes from. הם חיים וקיימים, that's why they exist as something separate. ולפיכך אין העולמות תופסים מקום אצלו יתברך, וזהו שמע ישראל השם אלוקינו השם אחד. And this again goes back to the idea that really, when you treat Hashem as the makom of the worlds, so in the end, the space, again, it's a very strange word, makom, because we understand it's like space, but really what it's saying is like not a physical space, but more like an intellectual space, or an existential space. So it allows everything to exist. So on that level, everything is nullified before him. And that's what it means that Hashem is one. Perush Shema, Lashon Hashma Balev. That a person has to make his heart hear this. He has to introduce it into his heart. איך שהשם אחד, א' בח' וד', דהיינו שהשבעה רקעים והארץ והארבע רוחות העולם בטלים הם לאלף הוא יחידו של עולם, ואינם תופסים מקום כלל לפי שברור שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד. ברור שכל העולמות מעולם ועד עולם בטלים הם לבחינת מלכותו יתברך, שאינו אלא בחינת שם בלבד, כמשל השם שבאדם שאינו אלא לזולתו, שצריך לקרותו בשמו, מה שאין כן כשהוא לבדו בפני עצמו, הרי השם בטל וטפל עליו ואין לו מהות בפני עצמו. We talked about this 1,000 times. ברור שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד means Malchus is just a name. And a name is only when you want to appear before others. So that's what he means, that the Malchus is what gives room, as it were, for the existence of others, of something that seems to be separate from Hashem. כך החיות המתפשט בעולמות אינה אלא מבידת מלכותו יתברך. All this thing that we call the life force of the world is coming from Hashem's Malchus, שהוא בחינת שם, it's only a name, להיות התפשטות מידת מלכותו על העולמות, שיהיה מלך שמו נקרא עליהם. אוקיי. אבל לגבי אור אינסוף ברוך הוא, בעצמו ובכבודו, but the infinite light itself, אינו תופס מקום כלל. And here we would have to say that he's talking about the Soviv. Soviv doesn't take up any space. וכמו קודם שנברא העולם, שהיה הוא שמו בלבד, ולפיכך ואהבת את השם, שיהיה בחינת אלוקיך, שיהיה אלוקה שלך, שתהיה בטל עליו יתברך בכל לבבך, פירוש שיהיה המשכת גילוי אלוקותו יתברך בתוך לבבך, and so on. The whole purpose of reality is to bring the second verse of Shema, ואהבת את השם אלוקיך בכל לבבך, בכל נפשך, בכל מאודיך, והשם אלוקיך here is referring to the transcendent. It should become what you're connected to on the inside. So it's to bring the Soviv into the domain of the Memale. That would be all of Chassidus on one foot. Okay. Yeah, really. It's to bring the Soviv into Memale. And that's the whole history of the world. It's the whole purpose of life. All this is an encapsulation of everything that counts. כי בית השימוש של בכל לבבך, פירוש בתוך, דהיינו להיות בטל רצונך. How do you see that this happened? When a person doesn't have his own ratzon. That he's completely nullified his ratzon to Hashem.
Which is very hard.
At least, even if he can't do it all the time, he should do it some of the time. So normally, when does a person do this? He's able to do this during davening. At least then, he's not doing something else. Unless he is doing something else. If he's holding his cell phone while he's davening. So it's a question. V'yetzer tov u'v'yetzer ra, with both the good inclination and the evil inclination. Before the Soviv, there's no difference between the two. They're all the same. להתקף יסית רעך ולהיות בבחינת את הטפל להוויה. And to make everything that is in existence as an addendum to godliness. It's just a tafa. וזה כל האדם. This is the whole purpose of man, שלא נברא האדם אלא בשביל זה. וכל ימי שנותינו בהם 70 שנה. The whole purpose of life of 70 years הוא כדי להמשיך גילוי אלוקותו יתברך למטה בתוך לבבינו בכל יום מעט מעט. The whole purpose is to bring down the revelation of the transcendent into our hearts, little by little, day by day, עד שיתהפך מן הקצה לקצה, until it flips completely. And the heart becomes the dwelling place not of the Memale, but a dwelling place of the Memale as connected to the Soviv. It brings the transcendent with it. So the person on the one hand is able to do work, because otherwise, without work, he's not considered something separate. He's not doing anything that we need him. He needs himself here for. The whole purpose of leading a separate existence for 70 years is to do this type of work. But the point is to bring the Soviv into the place of the Memale. Until it flips entirely. שהלב הגשמי מתפעל ונמשך לדבקה בו יתברך, כי הנשמה אינה צריכה תיקון לעצמה. Until the heart, meaning the memale, the place of the memale, becomes completely taken in by the presence of the sovev, of the transcendent. That's really what it needs. And why? Because the neshama is only an intermediate in this case. The neshama didn't need the mitzvah, this mitzvah, that the neshama doesn't need it. All this is, all the mitzvahs, everything
The
is...
mitzvah is a tikkun of the neshama.
No, that's what you keep saying. The neshama doesn't need any tikkun. The neshama is just an agent. It's a chelek elokah mimala mamash. It's part of godliness that's come down further to be welded into the body in order to do this.
Need tikkun?
The heart, the mamala, the feeling of separateness, the feeling of having a separate will, a separate agenda. The neshama is just the agent that facilitates that transformation, but it itself doesn't need it. This is what it means that before every mitzvah the Arizal would say to unify Kudsha Brichu and Shchinte, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Blessed One, with the Shechina, because the Blessed One, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, Kadosh Muvdal, is separate and holy, and the Shechina, B'chinat Sheshochem Mitlabesh Ba'olamot, so on. The Shechina represents, again, the feminine, the kingdom, the presence of Hashem as the light that fills all worlds, or the immanent. The Hainu. So to bring those two together, that's the purpose of all the mitzvot. And not what people think that the purpose of the mitzvot is for me to get more points somewhere. Because then when my soul goes to heaven, it'll be nice and happy. The soul will be nice and happy anyway.
I think so. Always.
Yeah, and it might feel that I could have done more, but it forgets after very quickly. I could have been used for more. Unfortunately, they didn't do much with me. The person didn't use me as much as they could have. But the neshama is very happy. It's an agent. All agents are happy.
That's a very optimistic picture.
For the neshama, yeah. It's a little less optimistic for the nefesh behemoth. דהיינו שהיה השראת קדושתו שהוא קדוש ומבודל ואני אהבה אלו שניתי בגילוי תוך עלמין, נקודת הלב הגשמי. What we call the inner point of the physical heart. That's where the Holy One, the Blessed One, the one who's separate, the Muvdal, who's on a different level. Again, this is all the Sovev. This is all the light that surrounds our world, will be contained within the physical heart. וזהו שכתוב ברבות נסוד, that's what it says in the Medrash, על פסוק תוכו רצוף אהבה, זו השכינה. What does it mean that his interior is paved with love? That love that we're talking about, that's the Shekhinah, that's the divine presence. When it paves, when it how do you say? It's not just paved; it's also the walls. When you line the entire heart with the Shekhinah, with love for Hashem, which is what he described before as wanting to be with Hashem, that's called the Shekhinah. K'man de'amar ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, as it says, you shall love Hashem your God, v'ayem b'Gemara, v'ayem שכתוב בדיבור נתחיל ועשית בגדי קודש, בפירוש יהיה השם שמיים מתאהב על ידך, והם בזוהר חלקים ובתחנם בעניין אהבה. So the whole point of life is love. That's the bottom line. We came into the world to learn how to love. There's people who understand they came here to learn how to love ice cream. And there's people who think I came here to learn how to love money. And there's people who say I came here to learn how to love my family, my wife, my parents, whatever it is. And then comes the Alter Rebbe and says the real love that you're looking for, which really the point of all life, is love of God. And that really includes all the different types of love. Why? Because here we're not talking about God in the sense just of religion, in the sense of doing things in order to be Yotze Zayin, doing things because I love Yiddishkeit because it's so cool, it's so nice, it's so on. But rather I love Hashem I love that which represents all that is holy and is beyond regular existence and so on, and pushes a person forward. And because of that, I have a family and I have parents and I have a wife and I have children. Because of this love becomes the motivator for everything that I love in life. And that's the purpose of Igeres HaKodesh, I think Tet, or wherever he says that you shouldn't love your family just because it's natural to love them, but rather the love should be an outgrowth. It should be a consequence of your love for that which is beyond, and then it becomes a true love. Then it becomes a true love that's not dependent on anything. And by the way, that is the whole. You could say that's the whole. We talked about this once in terms of angels that strike the physical world and make it grow. Yeah. So we said that in nature, you don't need to do anything really to make things grow. They grow by themselves. Yeah. Whereas a person is not like that. What?
They need certain nutrients and stuff, right?
They need, but they're there.
Alpha is an explanation.
So,
I mean, if you go to Dr. Moresky,
really, Chassidus is talking about a natural state of being. Why does it talk so much about nature? Why does it like to go out to nature? Because nature is not dependent on anything. Nature doesn't say, well, look, if there's too many trees here, I'm not going to plant another one. It's not dependent. It plants. If it grows, it grows. If it doesn't grow, it doesn't grow. It doesn't plan ahead of time. It doesn't contrive. It doesn't mechanize. It doesn't do all these cheshbonos. It just does it. Elokim asa et ha'adam yashar. A lot of times it means that God made man natural, straight. And you look for all kinds of cheshbonos, all kinds of machinations to figure out whether we want to do this or don't want to do that. The real way of doing things in the world is doing them independently of either the consequences or the circumstances. You do them because they're right, because they're the right thing to do. So, if a person loves his family because they give him nachos, or he loves his wife because she cooks for him, so he's in trouble. Because eventually she won't. Not because she's mean, or because there won't be a time like that, whatever it is. So if your love stems from a feeling of loving Hashem, again, loving that which is independent, which doesn't need you to do anything, and therefore love is not dependent on something that He'll give you, or something that you'll give Him. It's just love. It's just a connection. This is what I'm connected to. From that comes love for everything else in the right way. That you love it for its essence, not because it gives you back something. You depend on it, or it's ahava she'eina tluya b'davar. And just as there's love that's not dependent on anything, there's also yira that's not dependent on anything. To really fear God is not to fear the punishment, because that's dependent on something, if He gives me a punishment or not. There's also what we just had on Yom Kippur. Usually all our pleasure is dependent on something. If you give me something delicious to eat, so I'll have pleasure. If you give me something that my pleasure, my feeling of pleasure can enclose itself into, it can engarb itself, it has something to hold on to, then I get pleasure from that thing. But what if you strip me from all my garbs, from all my garments, from everything that my psyche can latch onto? That's what Yom Kippur does. La'chayotam bara'av, la'anotcha. The inuim, what is it called? The constriction of the nefesh is really only on the external, meaning that we don't eat and we don't drink. We don't do all the things that normally the pleasure can enclose itself in. But that doesn't mean we don't get pleasure. In fact, on the opposite. Says the Alter Rebbe in a very important mimer that we didn't learn in the Siddur, that the whole point of Yom Kippur is pleasure in its pure form. Pleasure that doesn't need anything to enclose into. It's just a pure feeling of enjoyment, of pleasure. It's even higher than Shabbos. On Shabbos, there's still something that is enclosed within. Because you eat and you drink. There's still things that the pleasure hold on to. The pleasure needs some medium in order to be felt. But Yom Kippur, it's the pure pleasure. You don't need anything at all. So every midah can also be completely independent of any kind of garment. So here it's talking about really that the purpose is to get to this type of love that's not dependent on anything that he gives me or does for me or shows me, or it's just a pure love of Hashem. And in a certain sense, when people have difficult times in their life, they're feeling like Yom Kippur, they're being stripped, where the only thing that's left is, do you love it for its own sake, or do you not love it for its own sake? Do you love Hashem for His own sake, or because that's lishma? That's really natural. That's what you would call a natural midah. And the Alter Rebbe actually uses this language. The first time I saw this was in Yom Kippur. He has a mimer on a pasuk in Tehillim, which now I forget, where he uses this language, and he says that something natural is something that doesn't need any kind of reason for being. Nature doesn't need a reason; it just is. It doesn't.
Nature is just a facet of Hashem, no?
So, it's a facet of revealing Hashem without any need for consequence or circumstance.
But nature has its own rules and ways of building everything and putting things together.
Again, there's how it works, but it never. Nature doesn't put up a series of conditions to make something grow. It either grows or doesn't.
Well, it does make conditions. It's got to have water. It's got to have this. It's got to have
But it's
that.
not a condition
It's gotta have space.
it's not a condition that it puts up and says, if there's no water, no, I'm not gonna try to grow. It tries to grow anyway,
And then it dies.
and it dies. That's how independence. That's what independence, real unconditional being, looks like. It's uncompromising.
Tough.
You know who taught people to be uncompromising?
Women, yeah.
Soviets.
Oh,
That's
yeah?
why the Russians are so tough, at least in their own mind.
I think that comes from the communist regime.
It's something that was in general in Russia. I don't think the communists invented it. They certainly perfected it. It still exists today. I mean, even now they have this thing. But it's like that. There's no compromise. Why? Because I don't do things because you like it or won't like it, or circumstances don't matter and consequences don't matter. I do things because this is how I am.
Kacha.
Okay? That's the Keter Kol Haktarim of the Baal Shem Tov.
Very nice. When we're going to learn bass?
Hopefully on Sunday.
What time?
It's the whole day. You're not doing anything. Sitting in the sukkah, no?
I guess such an optimist.